Buonasera a tutti.
Good evening, everyone. We just ended the proceedings of the G20 on labor in a joint session with colleagues from our colleague education ministers of the G20. It's a very significant and meaningful event because it does take up multilateralism in presence, whilst it started in remote. So it has somehow made it possible to get out from the current stage of the pandemic. Well, the pandemic has created the inequalities and has shown the limitations of systems of welfare and social protection. So it was agreed that we should set ourselves more ambitious goals to try and solve these issues. When you sort of are faced with difficulties, you might sort of decide to wait and see rather than set yourselves more ambitious goals. I think it's instead important to emphasize that there was an increased level of ambition that we have aimed at with respect to the topics that Italy selected as priorities and which were shared by the other G20 countries. We, first of all, mentioned the topic, the theme of gender difference, a gender gap in the labor market. The figures in our country show that women, more than men, have paid a higher price for the pandemic, as women are employed in precarious casual work or fixed-term work. So this is a theme where we had very many common points of view, and the declaration stresses this theme as a crucial theme to assess the goals of the different countries in terms of the social protection systems for the labor market. The other theme that we had put at the core of the proceedings was the question of social protection systems, how workers could be better protected, especially those that in light of the pandemic were totally deprived of ways and means of dealing with crisis situation and unemployment. So once again, on this theme, we shared the views of other members of the G20 group. I think that all in all, we have been confronted with very similar problems, and we have attempted to give common solutions, to come to common solutions. And the third question is something which has been accelerated in recent months, but started in the last few years. And I have in mind the question of workers who bear the brunt of technology, if you like, in terms of intermediation of labor or exercise their job through technological platforms. And this has to do with teleworking, remote working, and the work through platforms. And the pandemic has had a huge impact on that. So we agreed that we could better define the status of these workers to come up with a system of would sort of, it's an initial stage, but could be better define the conditions for works. I'm very satisfied because our contribution to the discussion was such that it showed that there was consistency on the sort of gender equality. Italy in the PNRR has set the goal of 30% of women hiring to overcome the problems of the pandemic. as we were adopting the final declaration, we received a piece of good news that a bill has been adopted in the Member of Deputies on the question of reducing the gap in terms of women pay and men's pay. What we're doing also in terms of the reform of social protection systems, which I'm going to submit to my own colleagues that take a specific interest in that. So there is consistency between the topic about work through platforms and its impact on the labor market and the regulation of work, and the action that we are undertaking to ensure that we come up with better protections and respect of rights. A few weeks ago, we decided to set up an observatory on these issues and to promote further the social dialogue between the social partners. And a few weeks ago, we also decided that we wanted to collaborate with other countries, starting with Spain, to start working on common rules in view of a more general regulation that the European Union is considering. So this is, in a nutshell, what we have been accomplishing in the last 2 days. Yesterday, I have explained, my colleague Patrizio Bianchi presented the results of the work. So the question of the link between training and labor, and training is a vital element to face up to changes and to have access to the labor market, but it is a precondition to consider the problems which exist today, well, between study, training, and labor and employment. There will be not very well defined and marked differences. So it was a decision that was made to keep a joint, to have a joint session of labor and education ministers of the G20 countries. And I think this is a prerequisite to give greater substance to an approach that Italy has followed as we focused on multilateralism. And we stated that these are the fora when we can together deal and address common problems with common solutions. While the solutions adopted by individual countries are not suited to deal with the major challenges before us today. So the results of our conference clearly indicate that there was a proper approach, and the results you obtained from the conference bear this out as well. Thank you.
Good evening. So let's start with the questions. I would like to ask the colleagues to still wear the masks when they ask the question. Riccardo Cavaliere, Rai News 24. Good evening. My question is on Exilva of Taranto. Today, the new decision has been made that the plant will be open. Various positive opinions have been expressed. The unions were relieved about this decision. I would like to know what is your response to this decision. And Whirlpool, Naples. Today, workers have organized a rally. They are asked for safety, occupational safety, and asking for Whirlpool to comply with the employment rules. Well, as to the first question, I think that this is another obstacle that has been removed in terms of the plan that the government has set up with regards to the steel industry. Now, of course, this is not the reason why we should should change our policy vis-à-vis our environmental policies and the steel industry. We have resources which have specifically been targeted to this end, and so we now, of course, settling a dispute, of course, is something that will pave the way for an easier solution. Now, with regards to Whirlpool, the only thing I may say is that we're talking here about a company which has benefited from a lot of public resources. And this shows that when it comes to delocalization, this is a further instance of how important it is to speak on a global level, and this very meeting shows this. So within a global context, I think the government and this is my personal commitment, the government will have to take up all necessary steps to guarantee a certain level of employment and through a process of reindustrialization, quote unquote, which I hope will be made all easier, hopefully, by the attitude of the Whirlpool, which has announced a number of layoffs will be taken. Adiane Kronos. Good evening. Let's start again with Whirlpool, because today workers have blocked highways against the layoffs that will start from July 1st because of the lifting of the ban on dismissals, whereas other unions will be organizing another rallying for a further extension of the ban on dismissals. So what is the position of the government right now on this policy on ban on dismissals? Are you optimistic about the way you will be relating with the unions about this? Well, you're asking me too many questions about what I hope may happen. I can say what happened up till now. You know my proposition. We are aware of the state of the art at the present Parliament has not specifically found a solution on this. I'm optimistic about finding appropriate instruments that will help us to address more difficult situations and that will, as I said in recent weeks, will take into account the way in which this crisis has impacted differently the various sectors, and therefore this should be viewed in a different way based on what kind of dispute settlement we were talking about. But I think we do have the conditions to successfully address these sticking points with regards to the consensus, or satisfaction. Well, I can make no estimate or about this. I mean, trying to reduce distancing, disparities, differences, and trying to promote social dialogue is indeed of the essence. Monica Mazza, Agenzia Nova.
Buonasera Ministro, io ho una domanda su
On the reform of social protection measures, you announced that you have already prepared the basis for that. I'd like to know how you are going about in terms of talking with the Ministry of Finances and Economy on this level. Do you have already a figure that you are going to submit to the social partners? And when will that happen? Could you give us an indication of the timing, a timeline for that? Well, in terms of the dialogue, we have started the dialogue we entered a dialogue with the Ministry of Finance and the Economy. So I can't give you any figure until this dialogue will be finalized. I said over and over again that it's a substantive investment involved, but which is a sustainable one in my way of thinking. As to the idea of going some further step forward, which I supported. I think we should go beyond a rationale that sees social protection measures as a passive defense instruments. That's why I decided that I wanted to involve two ministers that deal with transitions. So social protection measures should increasingly guarantee the transition processes that firms should adopt to face up to the environmental challenge. And obviously, the important involvement is that from the Minister Giorgetti has a role, a very important role to play with respect to industrial disputes. So we are going to meet, and by the end of this month, early weeks of July, I think we'll be in a position to give us all almost finished product. Laura Serrano from the agency R. Good evening, Minister. Could you tell us whether Italy asked for more stringent rules in terms of work through the digital platform, whether the G20 is working on this time and will be an inspiration for the riders in Spain? Well, the first step in a situation like this one is to agree on the need to come up with proper rules, and this will make life easier for us because it's quite obvious that the difficulty we have to deal with these problems is that is happening all over the world. So all the G20 countries agreed that it's important to come up with rules to deal with this event. We are in a dialogue with Spain. We feel very close to their approach. But then, of course, that will depend also in concrete terms on the outcome of the social dialogue. I have in mind the approach followed by Spain, which is something which is also being considered by other European countries. It's not by chance that the European Union is setting itself this specific goal, and Italy is very much going along that way. And Italy wants to play a protagonist role on this. Christian Banke, Handelsblatt.
Buonasera, Ministro.
Good evening, Minister. There are always good intentions which are expressed at the end of these meetings, but then there are actionable points that have to be reached, such as gender pay gap or youth unemployment. These are points vis-à-vis you have been committed to with your colleagues. Well, first of all, I think that statements do have a specific function. Other countries which were not fully aware of gender parity, social dialogue, the fact that they are underwriting a statement along these lines is not a solution to the problem. But indeed, it certainly shows that there is an interest. This is an additional instrument which is of a political nature, but which can be referred to as a lever, let's say. I firmly believe that the steps forward have to be based on measurement. And by this, I mean the following. The Italian presidency has been focusing on along these lines. For instance, with regards to gender pay gap, we have specific criteria, parameters, as well, and we also have other parameters and criteria with regards to occupational safety, occupational health, so which are more stringent than a simple statement. And we also have annexes to the statement. Now, with regards to unemployment, we do have targets which had already been set up in the previous statement and which have to do with the reduction of NEETs, the people who are no longer looking for employment or no longer studying. Now, we do not have as yet parameters or criteria as to which policies we have to develop to counteract unemployment. And this is something that we'll be working on in the upcoming months, because we're still part of the Troika of the G20, because we will try to work so as to find their appropriate measurement criteria. But if you want to see it on the positive line, well, the very fact that we already have set up parameters is already a positive step forward. We mustn't take this for granted. Chiara Borsi, Quotidiano di Sicilia. Good evening, Minister. The pandemic has made difficulties much worse, but we know that there is a shortage of skills. So how are we going to address this shortage in the future to facilitate transition from school to work?
Io ho fatto un discorso molto, voi sapete che, come dire, il tema è
As you know,
affrontato non solo da due ministeri, ma
this is an issue which has been addressed not only by various departments, but also from the central and the local point of view, in terms also of active labor market policies. So I was very blunt with the regions. I said, well, you have to work so that you can develop more efficient centers for employment services, so that that will allow you to have a more efficient monitoring of the real requirements and needs. Even the private sector can be involved in this, but of course we also need a public sector to help out the private sector. And then we have resources. These resources are unprecedented, and I refer to resources of the Next Generation EU. So let's use these resources, jointly deciding how to adjust existing instruments to what is changing in the labor market today. Also, in light of the knock-on effect, and by this I mean the previously developed policies will be affected by the new policies, the new situation. And so on a local and territorial level, we stand ready to have a tailor-made policy to adjust to the different local requirements.
volevo solo.
Let me just add, I didn't say so at the very start of the press conference. I would like to thank all those people who have cooperated in contributing to the success of this ministerial meeting. And I would also like to thank all those who have worked on the logistics. And all our guests were very positively impressed in terms of hosting. And of course, things went very smoothly, because it made it all the more easier, because Catania is such a beautiful city. And I would also like to say that Minister Cataldo is the minister who had picked up Catania as a city. So I don't want to take all the compliments about this myself, because she was the one who had decided to pick up Catania as the city for this G20 meeting, because she was very keen in having all other countries become more aware of the beauty of our city, of this city of Catania. So thank you once again to all those who picked up Catania for the organization, and thank you all for being here today.
Buonasera.